I'm divorcing a parasite who can't even do housework. And I'm demanding $60,000 in compensation. It seems I was the only one who thought I had a happy married life after marrying Robert, whom I met at a local event. He cheated on me with a new woman at work, and didn't even contact me when I was hospitalized with an injury. Even when I was hospitalized with a major injury, having both legs amputated, I felt so helpless. I can't believe he was getting along well with his mistress during this time. On top of that, to think he could say such awful things with a straight face. I've become so disheartened. Yes. I decided to silently withdraw. Then, when I was focusing on my main job, an opportunity for revenge came my way. He can only enjoy his time with his mistress for now. He should be prepared. People who can hurt others without remorse deserve appropriate responses. I'm Mary Gordon, and I'll be 35 this year. Since graduating from college, I've been helping with the family business and working part-time at an office. When I first started working part-time right after college, some people looked at me strangely, but I've gotten used to those reactions. While learning about the family business, I also took my parents' advice to gain experience in other jobs. I don't even need to explain why I work this way. People say things like, "You're young, you should work as a full-time employee." But everyone has their own circumstances, so I wish they'd just leave me alone. Lately, I've gotten used to the family business and have been entrusted with most of the work. Being an only daughter, I think I need to be able to handle the business on my own eventually. So I'm training hard now. I met my current husband, Robert, at an event organized by local businesses. I was working part-time and was asked to help with the event. Unable to say no, I found myself participating in this unfamiliar event. I was attending as part of my job, but that's when I met Robert, who was working at the booth next door. Oh, it's rare to see a woman participate in this event. Is it? It's my first time, but is it that uncommon? Yes, quite rare, so I was a bit curious. I participate in this event every year, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask. At first, our conversation was just polite small talk, but as we talked during our free time, he became someone I found intriguing. We exchanged contact information, and soon became close enough to keep in touch whenever we found time. Robert, who talks to anyone easily, and I, being shy, were an odd pair. But we got along incredibly well when talking about our common interest in comics. As we visited various comic-related places and museums, we grew more aware of each other and started dating. After dating for a while, on our second Christmas night, while walking through the lit-up streets, Robert suddenly stopped. "I've been interested in you since that first event we met at. Will you marry me? If it's with you, I'd be happy to." And so, Robert and I got married. Married life was blissful. Work was tough, but coming home to someone I love and having peaceful conversations at the end of the day was something I cherished. However, I never imagined that such a happy life would begin to unravel from a small fray. About 6 months after our marriage, one day, Robert brought home flowers. "Welcome home." "What's with these flowers?" "I got them from someone at work. They said to decorate the house I live in with my wife." "Do we have a vase for them?" "Come on, you know that, don't you? It's a waste if we can't properly display these beautiful flowers." Saying so, he went into the bedroom. The flowers Robert brought home were yellow roses. It's rare to give flowers, especially yellow roses, for no special reason. As I wondered about this after Robert left, I decided to decorate them in a vase I found at home. The next day, Robert came home with a small box. It's from the same female colleague who gave me the flowers, a wedding gift for us. What could it be? A vase? The small box I received was labeled a vase. it must be a vase. Maybe she thought it'd be handy since we don't have one. I put the yellow roses you brought yesterday in a jar I found. And placed it at the entrance. Oh, thank you. I was concerned by his slightly flustered expression. We already had the flowers in a vase. And why a wedding gift now, after half a year of marriage? Yellow roses are a rare variety not often seen in stores. It seemed too coincidental. Curious, I looked up the meaning of yellow roses and found it was "please break up." I decided it must be a coincidence and that I was overthinking it. Flower meanings aren't that common these days, it's just a coincidence. The flower isn't to blame, I'll just nicely display what I've received. So we also received a vase. Thinking it rude not to use the vase we received, I took it out of the box and removed the cushioning material. It was just a normal small vase in a box. As I was about to take out the vase, I suddenly felt pain. Ouch. When I pulled back my hand, I saw a crack in the glass. Despite being carefully wrapped in cushioning material, the unnatural crack was concerning. I had a bad feeling and decided to ask Robert about it. Hey, about the vase we received the other day. Did you drop it before bringing it home? Of course not. I wouldn't carelessly handle a gift like that. From his expression and demeanor, I was convinced he was telling the truth. Indeed, when he handed it to me at home, he was very careful, as if he were giving me a treasure. Is that so? It seemed to be cracked. Right, I need to water the flowers. No, don't dodge the question. What kind of person gave you those presents? Robert, scratching his head with an annoyed expression, answered. She's a new office worker who recently joined. Why does that matter to you? Well, it's not just curiosity. Then what? Whatever gifts I receive shouldn't concern you, right? Are you in a position to meddle in everything? From that day on, Robert's tone became much harsher. Whenever he spoke, it was full of sarcasm and it made me feel terrible. He would immediately blame me for anything, forcing me to live cautiously. Always trying to avoid his accusations. When Robert was unusually happy while drinking at home, I took a chance and asked him. Hey, about the roses and vase from the other day. I was thinking of returning the favor. What do you think would be good? Should I just choose something myself, if it's not too much trouble? No need for unnecessary things. It's a gift I received. So it would be rude not to choose myself. But I'm saying you don't need to butt in. You really don't get it. His attitude, the meaning of the flower, "please break up," and his unusual refusal of my offer to choose something in return, all of it was suspicious. Maybe it was a woman's intuition, but I decided to hire a detective for a covert investigation. The detective was highly competent, and I soon had the investigation results in hand. Seeing the results, I was unsure what to do next. I still had feelings for Robert, but I was also uncertain if I could trust him in the future. Above all, I was paralyzed by the harsh reality I had to face so soon after our marriage. Entangled in these problems, I decided to wait and see for a bit. I didn't need to act on the investigation results immediately. They could be my trump card when the time comes. So, I stored the results away. Hoping it was just a momentary lapse, I returned to my daily life with Robert. Whether that was the right or wrong decision, I didn't know. That day, I had been out at work. One day, my boss asked me to retrieve some documents from the warehouse. They were old, apparently located deep inside the warehouse. While searching for the requested documents in the dark warehouse, I accidentally caught my foot on a ladder. Unfortunately, I got tangled up in piled-up documents and containers. And they came crashing down on me with tremendous force. Unable to get out of the way, I ended up buried under a mountain of documents and containers. I was found by someone from another department who happened to have business in the warehouse and was rushed to the hospital. It seemed I had lost consciousness under the containers and didn't have the memory of it. When I woke up, the doctor immediately told me something devastating. Apparently, the way the containers fell caused severe injuries, and I had to have both of my legs amputated. Unable to accept this reality immediately after waking up, I could do nothing but stay in my hospital room. What could I do now, without my legs? What concerned me most, though, was Robert. It hadn't been long since we got married, and there was still unresolved tension between us due to the recent incidents. With the gift of roses and a vase, we had lived without major issues since our marriage, so it gnawed at my mind. During my hospital stay, my colleagues took turns visiting me. I felt terrible for worrying them, especially given their busy schedules. For their sake, who had shown me so much concern, I felt the need to recover and be discharged from the hospital as soon as possible. In between rehabilitation sessions, I tried contacting Robert several times, but he didn't answer his phone. Worried that he might not be eating properly in my absence, I sent him messages. But days passed without even a read receipt. My colleagues said they had informed my family about the accident, so he should be aware that I was hospitalized. While I was truly grateful for the visits from my colleagues, there were times when I felt very lonely and wished Robert was there. Not having him by my side when I needed him was more painful than I could have imagined. However, I couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity forever. Once discharged, I would return to my normal life. So I had no choice but to focus intensely on my rehabilitation, even with prosthetic legs. In the end, I received no contact from Robert until the day before my discharge. The day before my discharge, when I finally informed him that I would be leaving the hospital, he sent a one-word message, "Oh." Probably, he meant okay. As I muttered, "What does "oh" even mean?" to myself, I could do nothing but stare at the screen. In the end, I had a particularly close colleague from work pick me up and help me with my discharge. Returning to my regular life after a long hospital stay was harder than I had anticipated. Working with unfamiliar prosthetic legs was physically demanding. Fortunately, my job was desk work, so the accident didn't prevent me from working. But it was still challenging. What bothered me most was that I hadn't seen Robert even after returning home. He must have known about my discharge since he responded to my message the day before. My discharge was on a weekday, so maybe he had unavoidable work. But why hadn't I seen him at home for several days after my discharge? Was he coming home late at night after I went to bed and leaving before I woke up? However, there were no signs that anyone else had been in the house, while he had been busy with work and coming home late in the past. His complete absence for several days was unsettling. I hoped nothing strange or accidental had happened to him. While I was sitting in the living room looking at my phone with these thoughts, I heard the door open. Turning around, I saw Robert standing at the door with a large duffel bag in hand. Noticing me, he showed a brief hint of recognition but then tried to leave the room. "Wait a minute. Where have you been all this time? Stop nagging. It's none of your business." How can it not be my business? You haven't contacted me at all, and you haven't been home for days. Of course, I'm worried. Enough. It's exactly this kind of nagging that's so annoying. Shouting, he threw the duffel bag he was holding onto the floor with a thud. Being with you never leads to anything good. You always do unnecessary things. Unnecessary things like, "I'm busy with work," and then you go and get injured. On top of that, your company people tell me to go to the hospital. Such unnecessary meddling. How could you say that? Thanks to that, a deal that was about to be finalized is now ruined. A contract worth $100,000, gone because you got injured. As I was about to ask how my injury could possibly cause a contract to be lost, Robert slammed his hand on the nearby dining table. Anyway, being with a jinx like you, I'll end up unlucky too. Take responsibility and let's get a divorce. That's too much. Why all of a sudden? Without answering my question, Robert took a piece of paper from his duffel bag and thrust it in front of me. I'm divorcing a parasite who can't even do housework. And I'm demanding $60,000 in compensation. Divorce? Compensation. Right? It's compensation for the mental distress you've caused me. And for interfering with my work. Could there really be such a thing? Robert, who was speaking about this unbelievable matter with a serious face. Was he really the man I once loved? As I struggled to respond, he moved closer. Your only response should be yes. I won't listen to anything else. Yes. With no energy left to cry, I could only receive the divorce papers Robert handed to me. And you submit the divorce papers. I'm too busy. I quickly submitted the divorce papers and became single again. There's no time to stop for such matters, as big things are coming up at work. I hurriedly packed my belongings and left the house we lived in together. When leaving the house, I took my time getting ready. Maybe I was hoping Robert would change his mind. However, my hopes were in vain, as Robert clicked his tongue and glared at me. Hurry up and leave. You have no place here anymore. Robert snatched the half-packed bag and threw it at the entrance. I never expected our life together to end so quickly, but it couldn't be helped. Perhaps it was for the best, as I never fully grasped how selfish Robert was. In the end, Robert never really cared about me. I thought his gaze was on me, but it was probably always on his mistress far away. I'm frustrated with myself for not realizing something so obvious. But no amount of anger can turn back time. Now, I'm determined to become someone who can show up to Robert. Even without my legs, I haven't lost my guts. I refuse to be defeated here. Time waits for no one, so all I can do is give my best in what I'm capable of now. I'll continue with my usual work. My main job is real estate management. I run a real estate company inherited from my parents, with an annual rental income of about $9 million. It was a long journey to get the annual rental income to $9 million. Especially when I first started and didn't know anything about real estate management. However, the thought of returning home to Robert kept me clinging on and working hard. He probably never imagined that I was working so hard, with an annual income of $9 million. Looking back, it's probably good that I never told Robert about the rental income. If a person who can treat his wife so terribly would know I have millions in income, who knows what he might do. I don't often appear in the forefront of business, but sometimes I show up for important work. That day, I was heading out with a few male employees. I was involved in a major office building renovation project, and showed up for a meeting with the stakeholders, only to encounter an unwanted face. One of the stakeholders was Robert. He acted as if he hadn't noticed me, clearly intending to completely ignore me. Yet, I couldn't help but be bothered by the female employee standing next to Robert. It wasn't just because I was his ex-wife. Their behavior was too conspicuous for a professional setting. I noticed them talking intimately among the many employees and decided to confront them boldly. I'm pleased to be working together. You're the one who sent the flowers recently, right? The woman, talking amiably with Robert, turned to me and smiled. Yes. Did you enjoy the yellow roses? I hadn't mentioned yellow roses. Yellow roses are rare, and the way she casually mentioned them made it clear she was the one. Her smile was as radiant as a rose, but her eyes felt like a murky swamp. hiding inscrutable thoughts and schemes. This was no ordinary affair. To send such a declaration of war to a married woman was not normal. Bingo. It was she who sent the yellow roses and the broken vase, claiming it was a wedding gift. Yes, very much. A thoughtful person like you must have wonderful encounters. Thanks to that, I'm now engaged to marry Robert. She said this while showing off the ring on her left ring finger. We just met a little late, but it's a true love story. For some reason, she seemed proud to flaunt her love conquest. I couldn't understand why someone would boast about such a thing. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. The goddess of love knows what's real, and our love proves it. Robert smugly stood beside Angela, who was with her over-the-top ideas. I couldn't keep up with these two. All I wanted was to finish my work and leave, but then Angela spoke up. By the way, isn't the person in charge of the office building renovation late? What are they thinking, making us wait? After Angela had just finished boasting about her love conquest and talking about the power of love, she suddenly started acting like a capable woman. This almost made me burst out laughing. I noticed Angela glancing irritably at her watch while Robert casually placed his hand on her waist. I told them, "It's me. I am the person in charge of this building and the current renovation project." The two of them stared at me with dumbfounded expressions. Robert's face, already looking foolish, seemed even more so. Now you're lying too? Despite losing your husband. I think that statement is inappropriate in this setting. She dismissed my statement as a lie. Her reaction was telling. However, Robert's expression turned to shock, and he pointed at me. That can't be true, right? You're just a clerk. I was doing office work while helping with the family business. This is the family business. I didn't mention it because there was no need to. But now, it's none of your concern anymore. Robert and Angela still seemed incredulous. But after confirming with other employees and stakeholders, they finally seemed to accept it. Robert, during a name card exchange, tore my business card into pieces when he received it, leaving me laughing at his absurdity. Impossible. I can't accept this. You were just a part-time office worker. And I was fed up with you. That's a lie, right? It's not a lie. And I've never seen anyone tear up a business card like that before. It's the first time I've encountered such rudeness in all my years of business. The office building renovation meeting proceeded on time. But the couple's faces looked quite bad throughout. No wonder, realizing that someone they look down upon is actually the building owner must have been shocking. Robert kept trying to catch my eye during the meeting, which was distracting. He initiated the divorce and yet acted like this. What did it mean? After the meeting, there was talk of having a get-together. Given the likelihood of working together for an extended period, it seemed wise to know each other a bit better. The gathering was small, but finding a place on short notice seemed challenging. And there was difficulty with the reservation. While everyone was busy arranging, Robert approached me and slipped something like a piece of paper into my hand. Feeling something off, I looked and found a folded note and a piece of candy. Unfolding it, I read, "Can we sneak away together?" Is he mistaking this for some kind of mixer? Asking an ex-wife to sneak away together is just wrong. Disgusted, I looked at it twice. Noticing my reaction, Robert winked and made a shooting gesture with his fingers at me. Despite it being a business-related social event where one should stay till the end, I couldn't bear to remain in the same group as Robert. I quietly explained the situation to a subordinate and discreetly left the gathering without participating. I raced through the crowd, hoping Robert wouldn't notice my departure. 5 days later, I had an unbelievable number of missed calls. Checking, they were all from Robert, who had also left several messages. There were 33 calls in total. Calling so much during working hours, he must be quite idle. Bothered by the incessant calls, I decided to call him back. What is it? I'm busy, so your constant calls are troubling. Just say what you need to. Hey, why don't we give it another try? What are you talking about? Has stress gotten to your head? I'm serious here. I realized that you, Mary, are irreplaceable. You made me see that. Drunk in his own words, Robert's cheesy spiel continued. I was out of my mind back then, and you felt the same way, right? Don't lump me in with you. You're the one who initiated the divorce, ignoring me when I was injured. I wasn't ignoring you. It was just that. This was my cue to play my trump card. Angela Morgan, right? I had you investigated before. I know you were going to her place after work on weekdays, even when I was in the hospital. He admitted it rather easily. Yeah, I was at Angela's place. I thought you were in the hospital, so you'd be fine. So, you were busy being with Angela. You're remarried now, so it's none of my business anymore. I was just misled by her. It's not too late. Let's start over. I found it hard to understand his reasoning. You must be struggling without me, right? If you need help, I can hire a maid for you. I don't mind having others in the house. As I stood there, speechless and appalled, he confidently continued as if he had a brilliant idea. I'm thinking of quitting my job to support you. I'm calling you now because I'm ready to do that. You've always put your job first. To think that you would give up your work to take care of me. Yes. If it means living with you again, work doesn't matter. I'm so touched. I hung up the phone then. Knowing Robert, he would surely act as I imagined. Right after hanging up, I went straight to the city hall. What I submitted there was a non-acceptance notice. Filing this would prevent any marriage registrations from being processed without my consent. 2 days after my visit to the city hall, I received a call from Robert. Hey, it's me. I was told something weird at the city hall counter. Weird like what? Well, they said they won't accept it or something like that. What are you trying to say? Just spit it out. I'm not free all day. I mean, the marriage registration. I quit my job because we were getting back together, and now everything's gone awry. Though he tried to sound casual, I could sense panic in his voice. I decided to tell him the truth. They won't accept it? Well, of course. And trying to submit a marriage registration without agreement is just appalling. So, does that mean I can't get married? What should I do now that I've quit my job? Quitting your job was your own decision, wasn't it? I never told you to quit. And deciding to marry was something you rushed into on your own. I said my piece and then hung up, promptly setting my phone to block his calls. I should have done this much sooner. For a while, life was peaceful, but that tranquility was abruptly shattered. A woman appeared before me. Her appearance was disheveled, her hair a mess, and her eyes harshly narrowed. It's all your fault I ended up like this. Nobody at the company talks to me anymore. And Robert has gone somewhere. What's your plan? Take responsibility. For a moment, I didn't realize who she was, but her voice gave her away as Angela. The pride she once had when bragging about the yellow roses was gone. She seemed like a woman with a tough personality, raising her voice hysterically. Even though I knew I had nothing to fear, it wasn't pleasant to witness such a scene up close. Are you talking about Robert? He's no longer my concern, so let me go now. It's not none of your concern. Because of you, I lost my job, I have no money. You really are a jinx. It was then I realized something. Jinx, huh? You two are very much alike, a perfect match for each other. What do you mean by that? Jinx, that's what he called me too. Just like a parting shot when things don't go his way. So what? I'm not really a jinx. What's wrong with stating the facts? What's wrong? Why don't you think about it yourself? I'm not obligated to teach you, and you're bothering me. If you continue to harass me like this, I'll call the police, okay? Then Angela, fueled by anger, lunged at me. In the scuffle, my prosthetic leg almost came off, making it hard to keep my balance. I fell down, and the personal alarm I always carried sounded loud. Startled people around us began to look in our direction. While Angela was grabbing me, the police arrived. Apparently called by someone who had witnessed the commotion. I explained the situation to the police and asked them to check the security cameras. They confirmed I was not at fault. And issued a restraining order to ensure this wouldn't happen again. Why do I always have to suffer like this? Why? Maybe it's because you decided to have an affair with a married man and tried to snatch him away? Also, I will be contacting you through a lawyer to demand compensation. So please be prepared to deal with it. I couldn't let Angela get away with this without facing consequences. So I decided to pursue compensation. I wanted her to suffer for her role in destroying my marriage with Robert and for the affair. I later heard through the grapevine that Robert had married me, dreaming of a carefree life funded by my rental income, and had been running headfirst into that fantasy. He imagined a life of ease without work, relying solely on my rental income, which is just astounding. As a result, he quit his job and is now struggling to find new employment. Angela, too, became an outcast at work for getting involved with a married man, sitting on pins and needles. But now she faces the compensation demand from me, and the necessity to continue working for her livelihood. It's the result of being blinded by immediate desires and money. I have nothing to do with them now. As adults, they should control their emotions and act responsibly. I, on the other hand, am riding the wave with my real estate business, living off the rental income. Living off rental income might sound appealing, but in reality, it involves a lot of hard work. These are all high-stakes tasks, and I'm always under stress. With no break from the tension, it's honestly quite exhausting. To make a change, even a small one, in my life, I decided to get a pet. I had heard that pets could be therapeutic, and I truly feel it's true. Playing with my dog, Coco, helps me forget the hardships and challenges of work. I'm determined to fully enjoy and appreciate the happiness and joy I have now and live each day with gratitude.
My name is Rebecca, and I am a 33-year-old part-time clerk living with my husband, Jason. He is a doctor who seems busy every day, but on his days off, he also does volunteer work and hardly ever spends time at home. Still, he appears to be living a fulfilling life, never looking tired and always energetic. The way my husband and I met was through volunteering together. I think he is very admirable. Originally, my father was also a member of the volunteer organization that my husband attends, and my father told me about its activities. This organization supports children with intractable diseases, and my father, who ran his own business, was a donor.
I am grateful to your father. I wish he could have lived longer.
Jason would say this, expressing his regret over my father's passing. I also wished my father could have lived longer, but his death significantly changed my life. I had failed in my first marriage and then got remarried to Jason. My first marriage was about 3 years ago, a while after my father passed away. My ex-husband Brian worked at my father's company, doing a job similar to that of a secretary, so I knew him from before. When my father became ill and was hospitalized, Brian visited him many times besides his work, making me think that he was a kind person.
I am indebted to the president, so it's only natural. If you have any troubles, please feel free to tell me.
I was happy to hear Brian say that. My mother had passed away about a year before my father, and without any siblings, I had no one else to rely on, so I consulted Brian about various things. Despite hoping for my father's recovery with Brian's help, my father passed away after a short while. I was so shocked by my father's death that I couldn't think of anything, but the people from my father's company conducted the funeral. My father's company was well managed by its executives, and a successor had already been decided, so it continued its operations without any problems. Brian comforted me while I grieved, allowing me to recover somehow. I had come to rely completely on Brian, and about half a year after my father's death, Brian proposed to me, and I decided to marry him.
From now on, I will support you.
Initially, Brian, who had talked like this, began to change his attitude gradually after we started living together.
Didn't you inherit anything from your deceased father?
As we settled into married life, Brian became preoccupied with my father's inheritance. In fact, I inherited only a small amount of cash. The inheritance from my father was carried out according to the will, so there's no mistake. He always said, "Do not count on your parents' inheritance," so I wasn't expecting anything. However, Brian was not convinced by the reason why my father left me hardly any inheritance.
The company was performing very well, so your father, the president, must have had a considerable fortune. Did you inherit a large sum of money in secret from me?
Seeing Brian scream violently like this scared me. No matter how much I explained, Brian always had his doubts.
Did you receive the inheritance through somewhere else? Did you take some action in advance?
Brian started his baseless speculations and began investigating me and my father. Watching Brian obsess over my inheritance made me think that, in the end, he was after my father's fortune. Just after we got married, Brian gradually stopped coming home, and I lost track of why we married in the first place. Eventually, Brian saw the will through my father's lawyer and found out that most of my father's estate was donated to the volunteer organization, which made him angry.
Why would he donate to a volunteer organization instead of leaving the fortune to you, his own daughter? Is he out of his mind?
Seeing Brian regret not receiving any money as if it was his own loss, I was disappointed to realize that marrying me was indeed for the purpose of inheriting my father's wealth. I had known in advance about my father's decision to donate his assets to the volunteer organization. I chose not to tell Brian about the donation because I thought he would persistently ask why such a decision was made. Seeing Brian angrily react to the donation of my father's assets, I couldn't help but get angry as well. It's my father's assets, so you have no right to complain. Don't call him crazy. As I spoke with frustration, Brian retorted with a look of regret on his face.
I shouldn't have married someone poor like you. I was completely deceived by you, who only works part-time.
Brian then left the house. He had pegged me as a poor person just because I had only received a small inheritance from my father. Indeed, I was a part-time clerk, but I had enough money that I didn't need to work too much. My father knew this, which is why he donated his property instead of leaving the inheritance to me. I thought about divorcing Brian, but he didn't come home, and my calls to him went unanswered. Having not even been married for a year, thinking about divorcing so soon made me regret not getting to know my partner better before getting married to him. After a while, Brian returned and brought up the idea of divorce himself.
You might not have noticed because you're so oblivious, but I've been cheating on you the whole time. I'm going to divorce you and marry my affair partner, so sign the divorce papers quickly.
I was appalled by how Brian boasted about his affair, but I realized I could demand compensation thanks to his stupid confession. As Brian pointed out, I hadn't noticed the affair, so without his confession, I might not have been able to claim any compensation. I was planning to leave you too, so this works out. Since you've been cheating, you'll have to pay a decent amount in compensation. Brian foolishly hadn't expected to be asked for compensation and suddenly panicked.
I'm not going to pay any compensation. There's no point in being married to you if I don't get any inheritance and have to pay alimony on top of that.
Since Brian refused to pay compensation, I hired a lawyer to ensure he paid what was due. After we divorced, executives from my father's company came to the first anniversary of his death and told me about Brian's life afterward. Brian had quickly remarried his affair partner and left the company. When he was married to me, the daughter of the former president, he had been arrogant at the party and was hated by his colleagues. Rumors suggest his new partner is also wealthy, and he quit his job, possibly because he no longer needed to work. I regretted marrying such a terrible man, but was relieved to have ended things quickly. At that first anniversary, people from the volunteer organization that received the donation also came, and that was when I first met my current husband, Jason.
We will use the money donated by your father wisely.
I had participated in volunteer activities when my father was alive, but had never met Jason until then. As I continued to volunteer in place of my father, I coincidentally always ended up working with Jason, and we grew closer. My husband, who works as a doctor, was very passionate about volunteering, and I was moved by his dedication. He became a doctor to help children with the same disease that took his younger brother at a young age. My mother also suffered from a rare disease, and she passed away without any progress in medication development, which had initially motivated my father's dedication to volunteering. Having had a terrible experience with Brian and deciding never to marry again, I was drawn to Jason as we talked during volunteering. Unlike Brian, who was only interested in money, Jason, who wanted to help people suffering from diseases, was truly admirable. Jason also seemed interested in me, as I was passionate about volunteering, and we started dating. As we both began to consider marriage, Jason shared his dream with me.
I want to start a fund to develop treatments for rare diseases. To do this, we need to raise more awareness.
If Brian had said something like this, I would have suspected ulterior motives for money, but seeing my husband's sincere face, I decided to support him. Afterward, Jason and I got married and continued our volunteer work. We often participated in fundraising in the streets, and both my husband and I were actively involved. One day, while fundraising with other volunteers, someone suddenly approached me.
Are you still living in poverty? Are you getting by on handouts from everyone because you have no money?
As I turned towards the voice, I saw Brian standing there with a smirk. Just as I thought an unpleasant person had shown up, my husband asked with a curious face,
Is he someone you know?
I had told my husband about my previous divorce and how terrible Brian was. I didn't want to see him or have anything to do with him anymore. You must be mistaking me for someone else. I don't know you. As I said this and ignored him, Brian laughed happily.
What are you talking about? Have you forgotten about me, your ex-husband?
Because Brian shouted, the other volunteers noticed and started paying attention to us. As I wondered what to do, Jason stepped forward and responded to Brian.
You have nothing to do with her anymore, so please leave. You are disrupting our event here.
Brian got angry and yelled at my husband.
Who are you, acting all arrogant like that?
When my husband mentioned that he was married to me, Brian laughed.
So you married this poor lady, huh? You must be poor too, then.
Angry at Brian looking down on my husband, I told him that Jason was a doctor. Brian, not expecting that I had remarried a doctor, looked frustrated.
So you remarried a doctor to escape from poverty, huh? You played your cards right.
Brian himself had married me for my father's inheritance, and finding out there wasn't any, quickly divorced me to remarry someone wealthy. Because Brian was shouting, people began to gather around us. My husband and I moved a bit away so as not to cause further disturbance to the fundraising event. Thinking we were running away, Brian followed us.
Hey, don't run away, I'm just telling the truth.
Jason replied in a low voice, smiling maliciously as Brian followed.
Rebecca is not poor. If you keep saying these terrible things, we will sue you for defamation.
Brian quieted down for a moment when my husband mentioned suing, but then he started shouting again.
Go ahead and sue. I haven't said anything wrong.
As we were troubled by what Brian said, the head of the volunteer organization approached Brian.
You don't know anything, do you? Rebecca is actually very wealthy.
Brian didn't believe the story, so the head asked me if he could explain my situation to Brian.
Can I tell him about the donation you're making to our organization?
Not wanting to make a bigger scene, I silently nodded.
Rebecca is planning to donate $10 million to our organization. Someone like that can't be poor.
Hearing this, Brian didn't seem to take the large amount seriously.
That's impossible. There's no way someone who only works part-time could have such a vast fortune.
Brian laughed at this. Seeing Brian's ignorance, the head and my husband stared at him seriously, making Brian gradually believe the story might be true.
Maybe, just maybe, Rebecca inherited $10 million behind my back. The story about donating the inheritance was a lie, wasn't it?
I began to explain and correct what Brian has said. No, I earned that money from stock trading. I have $10 million. Even after I told him about earning $10 million through stock trading, Brian didn't believe it. My father didn't leave me an inheritance because he knew I earned enough. I had only discussed the $10 million asset with my father, and I didn't tell Brian when we were married. It wasn't that I didn't trust Brian from the beginning, but it felt better to keep quiet about it as he kept asking about my father's inheritance. It seems what I did was right. If Brian had known about how much I earned, it could have led to serious trouble.
Now that you know Rebecca isn't poor, please leave.
Despite my husband's request, Brian showed no sign of leaving.
Half of that $10 million is mine. We didn't divide our assets when we divorced, but aren't you supposed to split everything in half?
I was appalled that Brian was bringing up the division of assets from our divorce now. The $10 million I made from stocks was before I married you, so it's not subject to division. After I explained this to Brian, he looked frustrated.
If you had such a large sum of money, you should have told me. I wouldn't have divorced you.
Brian's frustration seemed to grow as he clenched his teeth tightly. Eventually, he even started to cry out of sheer frustration.
Damn it, you tricked me again.
Brian fell to the ground, flailing his arms and legs like a child, throwing a tantrum. Overwhelmed by his frustration, Brian began to cry, even with many people around. Embarrassed to be associated with him, we decided to call off the day's fundraising and go home, but Brian remained on the ground. Even as Jason urged Brian to go home to avoid causing any more trouble, he refused to stop. I then spoke to Brian in his embarrassing state. If you keep acting like that, your wife will laugh at you. Hearing my words, Brian suddenly stopped crying.
She took all my money and ran away.
Shocked by his revelation, it seemed Brian was deceived by his current wife, who ran off with his assets. The story about her being wealthy was a lie, and her parents were in on the scheme, tricking Brian. Brian had all his savings taken and was left with a huge debt. He filed a police report, but they haven't been caught yet. It's your fault for marrying for money. It's tough, but you need to sort it out yourself. Though I felt sorry for Brian, he was responsible for not realizing he was being deceived. It was odd for a wealthy girl to make Brian take on debt, so he should have realized it sooner. To avoid any further demands for money, we left Brian behind and went home. Brian kept contacting me, wanting to meet, so my husband firmly warned him.
If you call again, we'll report you to the police. Rebecca doesn't want to meet you.
Thinking he might be reported to the police, Brian stopped contacting us. When I first acquired a significant sum, I thought about shopping and traveling abroad. However, my father's advice,
You can spend it on whatever you want, but please also use some of it for the good of the world,
inspired me to donate a portion to charity. Seeing my father and Jason's dedication to volunteer work changed my mind. Even without the money from stocks, my husband's salary as a doctor was enough for us, so I decided to donate all of it to help patients suffering from rare diseases, like what my mother went through as well as Jason's brother. Thinking I never made money from stock trading in the first place would be fine, as having a lot of money like that only attracts bad people like Brian. After donating the money and feeling relieved, we found out I was pregnant, which delighted my husband. Seeing the mothers of children with rare diseases made me realize how challenging it is, but becoming a mother myself gave me a deeper understanding. My husband and I plan to continue volunteering, hoping to make even a small difference. I want to raise our child so that our child will also be proud of our efforts.
We've already submitted our marriage registration with Emily. So, no matter how much you cry and beg, the divorce is final. We are officially married. You kept me waiting for so long because you wouldn't agree to split. Emily, perhaps thinking of the time she was made to wait, glares at me with an unpleasant expression. I've been thinking about how to part ways without hurting you too much. Fortunately, your collapse gave me a good reason. Robin is really kind. But because of that, I had to wait for a long time, which really pisses me off. Both of them are making such selfish claims to me. A divorce from someone who can neither do household chores nor work properly. And I'll be asking for a property division. There's a lot I want to say. But it would be useless to argue with people who brazenly say such outrageous things. With that thought, I decided to accept the divorce. Understood. However, 7 days later, Robin called me, crying. My name is Julia Kirkland. 27 years old. I work at a branch of a real estate company. I got married 2 years ago, and now I live with my husband, Robin. Before that, I lived with my mother. My parents divorced when I was young, but my father paid child support properly. And my mother was independent, so we never struggled financially. I was also doted on by grandparents from both sides. For events like birthdays, as well as entrance ceremonies and graduation ceremonies. Each of them celebrated with me. And it's fair to say that I grew up without lacking for love in any aspect. Now, my mother lives about a 10-minute walk from our house. And we manage to grab lunch or tea together amidst our busy schedules. I also keep in relatively frequent contact with my grandparents. The person I meet the least is my father. However, I don't believe he's cold or neglectful towards me, rather. It seems he's being considerate towards my mother. We do keep in touch, and it almost feels like he's a father on a business trip. Despite having grown up without material wants. The consciousness of being a child from a divorced family lingers somewhere in my heart. And I've always harbored a longing for a family where both parents are together. Perhaps that's why I had such a strong desire not to divorce. As a result, I ended up in a painful marriage. I started dating Robin when he came to the branch I worked at looking for a new place to live. And I was assigned to assist him. His contract for the room he had been living in since his student days was ending. I'm living in a dorm room with no bath and a shared toilet. My salary has gone up a bit, so I'm thinking of moving to a slightly better place. After showing him a considerable number of properties based on such requests, we found ourselves talking about various topics during the moves, discovering shared interests, which brought us closer. Would you mind if we exchanged accounts? While it's not ideal to exchange personal contact information with a client, I too wanted to talk more, so I ended up giving him my email address. As a result, we started dating and eventually got engaged. The lease renewal for the room you found for me is coming up. So, I was thinking, why not move to a place where we can live together? Could you look for it again? That was Robin's way of proposing. We had a small, intimate wedding ceremony with just close family. I don't have many relatives, and Robin's parents aren't very close with their relatives. So it was decided that would be fine. The attendees were my mother and my in-laws, as well as my grandparents from my mother's side and Robin's grandparents. After exchanging vows in a chapel, we had a meal in a small restaurant, a small wedding ceremony. But I was filled with happiness. My father and paternal grandparents congratulated me. and celebrated the marriage when I went to inform them, despite not attending the wedding out of consideration for my mother. It wasn't because they were neglecting me. My father and I maintain a good relationship with that level of distance. And so, our married life began in a 2-bedroom newly built rental apartment. Of course, it was a property managed by our company, which I searched for with great enthusiasm. It wasn't very large, but it was spacious enough for a newlywed couple to start their life together. The location was convenient for commuting to both of our jobs. And I thought I found quite a nice apartment. You really are a pro, finding such a nice place. Just like my first room, Julia, you're really suited to be a real estate agent. Robin was satisfied with the room, and I felt fulfilled in both my work and personal life. Our newlywed life started off happy. We agreed to share household chores. But due to Robin's job in sales often keeping him out late, and me usually being able to come home by the regular time, I ended up handling most of the household duties. When Robin came home late at night, he was usually drunk. I had to drink because of socializing. It's tough because I'm not that good with alcohol. I understand. Just don't overdo it, okay? I know, sorry for making you worry. Robin would say this and hug me tightly. It was truly a time befitting a newlywed couple. However, about half a year later, Robin's attitude began to change. You might think half a year is still within the honeymoon phase. But as if the period of intense closeness had ended, he flipped his attitude and began to belittle my job. You're back already? Must be nice, working as a receptionist at a real estate office. Do you ever have to do overtime? Our store has night hours for clients who can only come in the evening. So there's hardly any overtime after daytime shifts. Sounds pretty easy. Why don't you work at night too? Since it's an easy job, a little more time won't make much difference, right? I don't want to be the only one you rely on for income. Let me clarify that both of us work. We share household expenses. And there's no truth to the notion that I'm relying solely on Robin's income. How many hours did you work today? Just moving around a bit when someone comes into the store and then getting paid for it. Real estate must really be an easy job. However, Robin's remarks only worsened over time. It's not like that. I keep in touch with clients, negotiate with landlords, handle repair requests from residents, and do many other things. Enough. No matter what you say, it all comes down to a passive job, doesn't it? You're not trying to do anything new or innovative, are you? Robin kept demeaning my work. Why would you say such awful things? You weren't like this before. Huh, awful? Do you think I'm saying something awful? I think I'm just stating the obvious. Robin glared at me as he continued. The problem is you're asking me to do housework even though our jobs are completely different. So that's it, I realized. Robin probably felt guilty for dumping all the household chores on me, which led to his attitude. Sorry, I've just been so busy with work, I inevitably end up putting more on you, Julia. At first, he would apologize, looking sorry. But now he acts as if it's natural for me to do everything, even leaving his laundry scattered on the floor. Could you at least put it in the laundry basket? Stop nagging. If you see it on the floor, just pick it up and put it in the basket yourself. It's something you can do instead of complaining to me. The situation became utterly hopeless. Although it was unpleasant, I silently took on the household chores, acknowledging that Robin was busier and I had more free time. I believed that once his work settled down, he would return to his old self. However, there was no sign of Robin changing back to the man I loved before we were married. By silently accepting the household chores, Robin grew increasingly arrogant. You're not doing much of a job anyway, right? So, keep the house clean. Even though Robin said I had more free time, I was still working. There were places I couldn't reach no matter how hard I tried. We had moved into a new apartment when we got married, and I tried my best to maintain its newness. But Robin would nitpick, looking for places I hadn't cleaned and accusing me of being lazy. If you can't handle the housework, why don't you just quit your job? Then, he started saying things like that. Frankly, it would be difficult to afford our current apartment on Robin's salary alone. When I explained this with numbers, Robin became furious. So, you finally say it. You think my salary is low, that you're looking down on me. I couldn't understand what he was accusing me of. Wait, I've never thought that, not even once. Liar. After we got married and you found out about each other's salaries, you started nagging me to do housework. That's because you thought my salary was too low. I had misunderstood. I thought Robin felt guilty about not being able to do housework because he was busy. But his true feelings were different. After getting married, it turned out my salary was higher than Robin's. This fact hurt Robin's pride, making him feel as if he was being made to do housework because he was inferior. Of course, my salary is low. You must feel so good about yourself, earning more than me. It's not that much more, I think. The hours worked are different, aren't they? Ah, I see. I came to another understanding. Robin felt inferior not just in terms of total salary, but also in terms of hourly wage. That's why he was so fixated on the fact that I hardly ever had to do overtime. I never thought of you that way. I've never looked down on you. But if I've made you feel uncomfortable, I'm sorry. Though unaware, I might have inadvertently hurt Robin. With that thought, I apologized to him. As long as you understand. Listen, in a marriage, the husband is superior. If you can understand that, then make sure you take better care of the house. Although I found it unreasonable, I was relieved that Robin seemed a bit calmer after my words. Being a child of divorced parents, I had a strong desire not to go through the same ordeal. I didn't want to have conflicts with Robin. I had expressed this sentiment to him, so he should understand my feelings. I thought I just needed to be a little more patient. Arguing would only hurt us both and worsen our relationship. If I could just make small concessions, we could live together without conflict and maintain a good relationship. I hoped this would bring back a peaceful life. Robin would return to the kind person he was before our marriage. That was what I believed, but it was a naive thought. Thinking he had subdued me, Robin became even more arrogant, behaving like a king and treating me like a servant. Just do as I say. Don't even think about having your own opinion. Yes, I understand. People who don't have the initiative should just silently listen to those who do. And always speak to me with respect. Before I knew it, I couldn't argue back at all. I had heard that a frog wouldn't notice being slowly boiled if the water's temperature was raised gradually. I was like that frog, unaware of being pushed to my limits until I suddenly collapsed at work one day and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. 2 weeks into my hospitalization, Robin visited me, but as soon as he entered the room, he smirked and said, "You're such a useless woman." A woman I had never seen before stood next to him. "I'm sorry. I'll try to get back home as soon as possible. Please forgive me." "No need to try. Take all the time you need to recover." "Really?" I was surprised by his unexpected words, thinking Robin would surely blame me. "Yeah, really. Because you and I have no relation anymore." "What do you mean?" "You're so slow to catch on. It means I'm divorcing you and marrying this woman, Emily." Robin pulled the woman named Emily close, and she leaned into him happily. Emily was a much older woman than Robin, with heavy makeup. Actually, we're already divorced. I haven't signed any divorce papers. You're useless and now sick. You have no value to me anymore. So, I've already filed the divorce papers. It seems he forged my signature and filed the divorce papers. That can't be legal. But it worked. Robin and the woman exchanged smug looks. And who is this person? My new wife. Nice to meet you, I'm Emily, Robin's wife. Well, the new wife. Emily said this with a triumphant air. We've already submitted our marriage registration with Emily. So, no matter how much you cry and beg, the divorce is final. We are officially married. You wouldn't agree to break up, making me wait for so long. Emily, perhaps thinking of the time she was made to wait, glares at me with an unpleasant expression. Waited? How many days are we talking about here? Days? It's not about the number of days, it's been a year. So, they've been involved for a year. You probably don't understand how precious 1 year is for a woman in her 30s. How old are you? I might look young, but I'm 38 years old. Emily says this proudly, her heavy makeup almost cracking into a smile. She looks her age, but mentioning that might cause trouble, so I decide to keep quiet. I was kind, so I was thinking about how to break up without hurting you too much. But then you collapsed, which gave me a good reason. Robin is really kind. But because of that, I had to wait for a long time, and it really pissed me off. They both make such selfish claims to me. Divorce from someone who can neither do household chores nor work. And I'll be asking for a property division. There's a lot I want to say. But it would be useless to argue with people who brazenly say such outrageous things. With that thought, I decided to accept the divorce. Understood. After I said that, the two of them left looking satisfied. It was like a storm. I muttered to myself and pulled out my smartphone from under the blanket. I had recorded the entire conversation. I can use this to expose Robin's wrongdoing. When I was hospitalized, it seems I was in a dangerous state in many ways. Following Robin's orders had made me unable to think for myself. I was always careful not to make Robin unhappy, did household chores to satisfy him, and worked to continue our life. I collapsed due to overwork. I hadn't been eating or resting, just continuously trying to please Robin, which apparently led to my sudden collapse. I remember being told by a colleague that I seemed to have lost weight, but I think I replied that I was dieting. I answered reflexively because my colleague looked worried. If Robin knew someone was concerned about me, he would be displeased. That's why I gave such an answer. What started as a small concession gradually became a surrender of my ground to Robin, pushing me to the edge of a cliff. I had no idea I was in such a state. I was really surprised. I thought you were living happily, my mother said, tears welling up in her eyes, when she rushed to the hospital. I still don't understand why I collapsed. That was the truth. I just wanted to live happily with Robin. But why did it come to this, even though I was just enduring a little? And Robin? Didn't he say anything when he heard you collapsed? He was such a kind person, what happened? I would like to know that myself. It's hard to explain everything to my mother in a few words. For now, just rest. We'll think about what to do next later. I ended up staying in the hospital for a while. Thanks to the rest, both physically and mentally, the fog in my mind cleared. Why did I listen to Robin? Gradually, I was able to think for myself again, realizing it would be difficult to continue my marriage with Robin. That's when Robin and Emily came to visit me in the hospital. Robin seemed to think he could still manipulate me, but by that time, I had fully awakened. However, I decided to pretend I was still under his control to see how things would unfold. Quietly, from under the blanket, I turned on the recording function of my smartphone. Now, my smartphone contains evidence that Robin forged the divorce papers. I was sure that constituted some kind of crime. Upon checking, it turns out to be forgery of private documents, punishable by imprisonment for not less than 3 months and not more than 5 years. Often, sentences are described as X years of imprisonment or a fine of Y amount. But I read that this crime does not include a fine as a penalty. That means, unless given a suspended sentence, one has to serve time in prison. Somehow, a crime that carries only imprisonment and no option for a fine feels quite serious. So Robin did that to me. There's no need to hold back against such a villain. I made a call to someone from the smartphone I had in my hand. I was discharged from the hospital 5 days after Robin's visit but did not return to the house we lived in. Living in that house for 2 years, the first 6 months were happy. But then Robin gradually began to change, and by the time a year had passed, he had become a tyrant. Probably around the time he met Emily. What I couldn't understand was, if he wanted to divorce me and marry Emily, why did he need to control me like that? What exactly was Robin's goal in doing such things? But now, rather than pondering over these questions, I had something else to do. Now that I've regained my mental and physical health, I've decided to take my revenge. 2 days after I was discharged, or 7 days after Robin and Emily's visit to the hospital, Robin called me as I expected. "Julia, I'm so glad you picked up the phone. Where are you now? Why haven't you come home?" The nerve he had to say something so blatantly. I was speechless with astonishment. "I'm sorry. Who is this? Stop joking around. It's me, your husband, Robin." "I don't have a husband. If Robin filed for divorce and married Emily, then he is Emily's husband. He's not my husband. You've divorced me and remarried Emily, haven't you? Then, you are Emily's husband, and we have nothing to do with each other." "That's okay, I'll divorce Emily. Then we can remarry, so there's nothing to worry about." "No one is worried, I was just stating the facts." "I'm not worried. I have no intention of remarrying you. Please be happy with Emily. You're misunderstanding. I only love you." Robin began to cry over the phone. Did he think that crying would move my heart? I was being threatened. Emily is the daughter of the president of our company. She said she'd fire me if I didn't date her. I was just going along with it, believe me. Robin continued to plead through his tears. Was the forgery of the divorce papers also Emily's order? Yes. She said if I didn't do it, she would make things terrible for you. I had no choice. I intend to sue you for forging private documents. Robin stopped crying and went silent when I mentioned suing him. By the way, it's time to renew the lease for that house. I won't be renewing it. It's a good time for a change, with no house, no marriage, and no love wasted. Wait. I love you, listen to me. Unfortunately, our company will not be able to assist you with finding a new home. Please use another service. Goodbye. I hung up on Robin's cries and blocked his number. Robin hurried to contact me because he had learned the truth. That morning, he must have seen an article in the newspaper or a news segment on TV about my parents. President and spouse of Thompson Homes, remarried. My parents, who had divorced when I was young, remarried. Seeing a photo of me with them, Robin must have realized that I was the daughter of the president of Thompson Homes. My father, or more precisely his ancestors, were large landowners. And Thompson Homes was started based on the real estate they owned. Even now, there are houses and buildings all over the United States owned by our company, and managing them is the business of a Thompson Homes. I work at one of its branches. My parents didn't hate each other when they separated. My mother, who was skilled with her hands, had started making jewelry as a hobby, which became popular and led her to start her own brand. This annoyed my paternal grandmother. Thompson Homes was my grandmother's company, into which my grandfather had married. Together, they had expanded it significantly. My grandmother had wanted my mother to help with the company alongside my father. So, it's perhaps natural that as my mother's brand grew, the relationship between her and my grandmother soured. As a result of various issues, my parents decided to separate. To say that marriage is just between two people doesn't cut it when Thompson Homes is such a large company, and my mother was deeply committed to her brand. They decided to separate to prevent any further strain on family relations from affecting the company's management. My mother took me and left the house, but my grandmother allowed it. Perhaps my grandmother wanted my father to remarry and have another child to be the heir. But despite her encouragement, he never remarried. The same went for my mother. Even after their separation, they continued to care for each other. That's why my mother kept the Thompson surname after the divorce. And I also had the Thompson surname before marrying Robin. Now, unknowingly divorced, I have returned to being a Thompson. Though my grandmother and mother had a strained relationship, my grandmother respected my mother's character and abilities and loved me as her son's child. She was a very fair and open-minded person. But considering the family's inherited wealth and the company, she couldn't accept my mother starting her own company. She wanted the whole family to face the same direction and continue protecting Thompson Homes together. My father, wanting the same, asked if I would work with them, given that I wasn't against the idea. I agreed, under the condition that I would join as an ordinary employee. So, very few people actually know that I am the president's daughter. My grandmother knew but never made a big deal out of it. I perfectly separated my personal life from business. But I secretly heard from my father that my grandmother was pleased I was learning the real estate business. The precarious situation I found myself in was partly due to my parents' divorce, which, upon hearing, made my grandmother reconsider many things. She came to my mother, apologized for being stubborn, and asked her to come back. That's how, after 25 years, my parents decided to remarry. Such an interesting story couldn't be ignored by the media. After my mother visited me in the hospital and told me about their decision, I said I wanted to join the interviews with my grandmother. Naturally, she was delighted to accept. Major newspapers, TV, and magazines came to interview us. And my story was also prominently featured. Naturally, this caught Robin's attention, as I had hoped. As planned, Robin learned that I was the daughter of Thompson Homes president and a wealthy landowner. His frantic, tearful phone call was the result of realizing the magnitude of what he had lost. I sued Robin for forging the divorce papers. Robin's lawyer sought a settlement, but I refused, resulting in Robin being prosecuted and given a suspended sentence. Of course, I also demanded compensation from Emily. And since she knew about the forged divorce papers, I sued her as an accomplice. Emily's lawyer also sought a settlement, but I refused that too, and Emily received a lighter, but still suspended, sentence compared to Robin. Robin and Emily's meeting was at the company's founding party. Emily had fallen for Robin at first sight, despite knowing he was married, and pressured him into a relationship. Robin was initially troubled by Emily's advances due to her being 10 years his senior and not his type. But he couldn't refuse her because she was the president's daughter, and ended up in a deep relationship with her. The president, too, had been troubled by Emily's inability to marry and turned a blind eye. He thought if Robin took her off his hands, a little money would solve any issues with Robin's wife. Robin confessed that initially, his behavior towards me stemmed from guilt over making me do almost all the housework despite his lower income. I wanted to believe that by speaking poorly of Julia, I was doing the right thing. I was happy to be pampered by Julia and was being spoiled. Looking back, I realize how childish I was. He said this while crying. But even if that were true, the fact remains that he deeply hurt me and pushed me to a point where I felt I had lost my heart. Initially, even if it was out of a desire to be spoiled, as Emily came into the picture, he probably thought that if I became ill, he could divorce me. So when I got sick, he hurriedly forged the divorce papers and filed for marriage with Emily. He thought that I, who had been like a puppet following his every word, would accept it without resistance. If Emily's involvement was discovered, the divorce would be his fault. He planned to make it seem like I was to blame for the divorce. At home, Robin treated me like a servant, while with Emily, he bided his time, juggling both relationships and waiting for an opportunity. I never intended to leave Julia, but Emily was so persistent, I couldn't break it off. I truly love only Julia. I was just waiting for Emily to give up. Robin desperately pleaded this to his lawyer, but of course, no one would take him seriously. Emily's father was furious and forced Emily and Robin to divorce. Subsequently, Robin was fired and is now working at a company that barely agreed to hire him, working from early morning till late at night to pay the property division he owed me. Emily's father didn't demand property division from Robin. This was not only because Emily was complicit, but also because he prioritized ensuring Robin could pay me. Honestly, I didn't care about the money, but I wanted them to pay for their crimes. Which is why I refused any settlement offers from Emily's father, despite his pleas. Emily's father said he wouldn't let her go free again and begged me to settle things quietly. But after understanding my firm stance, he eventually accepted it. Emily is now under strict family surveillance, starting from scratch to mend her ways. Sometimes, I think that if Emily hadn't fallen for Robin, none of this would have happened. However, considering she pursued Robin despite knowing he was married, her crime is not light. Robin could have clearly refused Emily's advances, being aware of his marital status. But he didn't. Dreaming of marrying the company president's daughter and betraying his wife. That is an unforgivable crime. What happens to them from now on is no longer my concern. As long as they never appear before me again, that's all that matters. After my parents' remarriage, I, as the president's daughter and heir, began studying anew. Although I had learned about real estate as an employee, managing a business is different. Now I must study even more, including company management. My stubborn belief in not wanting to divorce like my parents led to such an ordeal. It was my weakness. If I had been stronger and faced Robin properly, maybe things wouldn't have ended this way. Perhaps we could have remained a happy couple. It pains me to think this because I genuinely loved him. I married him out of true love. To have turned such a person into a criminal weighs heavily on me. There are moments when I feel I'm the one with the greater sin. But my mother and grandmother assured me otherwise. You shouldn't blame yourself. You didn't hurt anyone. What they did was entirely their choice. Your mother is right. If there's any fault, it's mine for not accepting your mother, making you timid. My mother and grandmother, now reconciled and close, comforted me in this way. Blaming myself also means blaming them, which I came to understand. Humans are made to make mistakes. What's important is how we deal with those mistakes. I'll meet someone I can love as much as I did Robin, I don't know. But I'll make sure not to repeat the same mistakes. Refusing to live a life where I don't love anyone again because of one failure. Even if I don't meet such a person, I want to live a life where I can walk straight and proud alone. I'm just starting to take those steps. I've sworn to myself to live a happy life, no matter what. Wow, you're still alive, huh? What do you want? Just happened to see you. But, you remarried and had a kid, huh? Seems like a defective product. That's none of your business. I couldn't stand his words. When I glanced at my son, he looked apologetic even though he hadn't done anything wrong. Raising a child who can't walk, that must be tough for you. The man who appeared during a walk with my son was my ex-husband, who had left me 8 years ago. I had remarried, and my son, born from this marriage, has a leg condition requiring him to use a wheelchair. I don't want to see your face, so could you please go somewhere else? Then, the ex-husband started to laugh mockingly. Hey. Don't say that. It's a reunion, after all. Then, my current husband called out from behind. Is something wrong? Seeing my husband's face, my ex's face turned pale and he began to tremble. I, Kate Irving, married Paul when I was 24 years old. After high school, I found a job at a small local renovation company. On the other hand, Paul was a university graduate working at a well-known company. I never thought we would cross paths, but we met at a party. May I have a word with you? Me? Yes, is that okay? Okay. I mean, yes. My company was a subcontractor to the company Paul worked for. I was able to attend the party as a last-minute replacement for the president, who had an urgent matter to attend to. Paul was handsome and seemed very popular. I thought maybe he was misunderstanding something. Well, I'm just a stand-in here. I see. But that doesn't matter to me. What? Sorry. I actually fell in love at first sight. I was so surprised I couldn't speak. I had never been told something like that before. Then, a man called out from behind. Director Morrison. You seem troubled. No, this is... I apologize for my subordinate. He's excellent but a bit pushy. That's not true. Well, keep it moderate. With that, Director Morrison left. I never imagined that this encounter would lead to what happened later. I'm serious. Could I get your contact information? Oh. Yes. I gave him my contact information as he asked. Strangely, I didn't feel bad about it. Paul and I quickly grew closer after this meeting. Perhaps I was a bit carried away. Exactly 2 months after we met. I want you to be my girlfriend. I'm happy, but I felt the difference in our educational backgrounds, wondering if we really matched. However, Paul didn't care about such things. Thus, our relationship began, and we married when I was 24. How about we move to a new place? Or, building a house might be good. What? Isn't it too early for a house? Is that so? If Kate Irving says so, I'll wait. When you get married, you start to see things you didn't notice while dating. The first thing I noticed was our different attitudes towards money. Paul was excellent at his job and earned a significantly higher salary compared to his peers. Meanwhile, after working for nearly 8 years with a high school diploma, my salary was just about the same as a new graduate's. Haven't you been spending too much money lately? What are you talking about? Money is meant to be spent. That's easy to say, but... well, it's fine. After about half a year of marriage, Paul would laugh it off. But gradually he began to bring up our income and educational differences. and look down on me. Don't you always wear the same clothes? Huh? No, I don't. What I'm wearing now is just a different color. What? A different color? Come on, wear something better. People will look down on me, won't they? I just don't want to waste money. Then Paul sighed heavily. That's why it's no good. Maybe it's because you're just a high school grad. That has nothing to do with it, right? Yes, it does. High school grads earn less money. What's that supposed to mean? I'm a fast tracker in the company. Having a wife like that is troublesome. Paul began to boast about his excellence. There was no doubt he was competent. However, Paul's heart couldn't keep up with his abilities. His behavior towards me became increasingly harsh. Having a wife like you would be pitiful for any kids we might have. What are you talking about? Because if we had kids, half of the DNA would be from you. So, you're saying you don't want kids with me? Well, yes, that's about it. At this point, I couldn't even muster the energy to argue. In fact, I started to feel that I didn't want children with Paul either. We became like strangers living in the same space. Despite always criticizing what I do, he would get angry if I complained about anything he did. Paul started coming home late, claiming he had to work overtime. I have something important to tell you. He had a serious expression when he came back from work, which made me brace myself. I found someone better than you. Let's get a divorce. Huh? Does that mean you cheated? Well, yeah, I guess that's what it means. What is that supposed to mean? It just means we're not suited for each other. Of course, I'll pay you compensation. You want the money, right? He continued to mock me. The thought of being married to such a man made me feel pathetic. Fine. Let's get a divorce. Is that so? He smiled at me like never before. I had never felt so disgusted by someone. 3 weeks after he asked for a divorce, it was finalized. And I received the compensation without any issues. I thought, what should I do now? Feeling uncomfortable even though we were not working at the same company. But we're business partners, I decided to resign. Then, I happened to meet someone. Noticing my distressed state by chance, he reached out to me. I talked about my divorce and my marriage. As he listened earnestly, tears naturally started flowing. It must have been hard, but you'll be okay. Those words were enough. Though I wasn't sure why, I felt that I could start over with this person. And so, I remarried. Overseas? Yeah, it's more of a promotion than a transfer. I think we won't be able to come back to the US for a few years. But I had no doubts. I've always wanted to live overseas. Thank you. Thus, I left the US. I felt it would be easier to be in a country I had never been to than to stay in the US and be reminded of Paul. That expectation was correct, and I gradually adapted to life abroad, eventually giving birth to a son. No way, that can't be. My son was born with a leg condition. And it was said that he would likely need a wheelchair as he grew. It's okay. I'm here, and we'll manage together. Yes. Despite my worries, my son grew up healthy and strong. And when my husband's transfer period ended, we returned to the US. Having almost forgotten about my ex-husband, Paul. A week after returning to US. The weather is nice today. How about we go for a walk? Huh? Are you sure? It must be hard for you, Mom. What are you talking about? You're a child, you don't have to hold back. But, besides, your dad will be with us today. What? Really? Now you're interested, right? Yeah. I decided to take my wheelchair-bound son for a walk around the neighborhood. We arrived at the park and sat on a bench. I'll go buy some drinks. Thank you. We'll wait here then. Got it. I'll be right back. Left alone with my son, we watched children playing in the park. It would be nice to run around like that. Hearing my son's murmured wish made me feel helpless. I thought, if only I could have given birth to him healthy. Despite trying not to dwell on it, seeing my son's face like that brought back those thoughts. Mom? Are you okay? It's okay. Then, my son smiled and said, I'll definitely be able to walk. Then it will be easier for both Dad and Mom, right? Yes, it will. I thought, what am I doing getting discouraged? With renewed spirit, I continued chatting with my son when someone approached us. I could never forget that face. The hatred still hasn't faded. Wow, you're still alive, huh? What do you want? The person who appeared was Paul, my ex-husband who left me 8 years ago. Just happened to see you. But, you remarried and had a kid, huh? Seems like a defective product. That's none of your business. I couldn't stand his words. Glancing at my son, I saw his apologetic face, even though he had done nothing wrong. Raising a child who can't walk, that must be tough for you. I don't want to see your face, so could you please go somewhere else? Then, the ex-husband started to laugh mockingly. Hey. Don't say that. It's a reunion, after all. A reunion? Don't joke around. Why are you even here? Want to know? Actually, I'm getting married again. What? Someone much better than you. He was as irritating as ever. What happened to the previous woman? Oh, her. I dumped her. Just like someone else, she was not good enough for me. So, you're going to dump her too, right? No, not this time. Because she's the president's daughter, nothing like you. President's daughter? You. And a divorced you getting involved with someone like that. Yeah. I made it seem like she cheated. Meaning, he was referring to me. Despite being the one who cheated, he truly is despicable. Then, my current husband called out from behind. Is something wrong? Oh. I felt it was bad for my husband and Paul to meet. But then, I thought of using this moment to my advantage, to laugh at a flustered Paul. Seeing my husband, my ex's face turned pale, and he began to tremble. Why is Director Morrison here? I thought he was overseas. Paul, huh? Actually, I returned to the US a week ago. Is that so? And, what's the relationship between the director and Kate? Oh, I guess I didn't mention it. We're married. What? Paul was stunned and motionless. When I married my husband, we decided not to tell Paul to avoid complications. My husband respected my wishes and only reported our marriage to a select few executives, keeping it hidden. Never thought it would come in handy like this. So, what were you talking about? Oh, that's... Hey. Stop it. Ignoring him, I continued. This man was saying our son is a defective product. What? He said that? No, it's not like... Paul seemed to be fumbling for an excuse. And he's marrying some president's daughter. President's daughter? Oh, yeah. I heard someone was marrying a client's daughter. Not just that. He said the reason for our divorce was my cheating. Really? That would be found out easily. Confused, Paul let slip something he shouldn't have. The director is being deceived. She has no education, no. Immediately, my husband retorted. You don't understand anything. Education doesn't matter. Even our president is a high school graduate. You're essentially criticizing him. No, that's not what And I'm not a director anymore. Coming back to US is like training for me. I'm going to be the managing director. What? Well, you wouldn't know. The official announcement hasn't been made yet. That's congratulations. I'll be leaving then. Paul, feeling it was dangerous to stay any longer, tried to leave. But we couldn't let him off that easily. Wait a minute. I'll make sure to inform both the president and the concerned parties about what I've heard from Kate Irving. Please, wait. Not very graceful in defeat, are you? I thought this was a good opportunity to press Paul further. What are you so afraid of? Losing your current position? What do you know? I certainly don't know about your job. I'm not interested in it. But I do know this much. What's that? You're about to go through hell. I'm excellent. That won't happen. You're just fantasizing. He completely fails to understand the situation he's in. Every time he insults me, his standing with my husband, who is right beside me, just keeps dropping. Maybe you should start worrying about yourself from tomorrow. That's right. Prepare yourself, Paul. I won't accept this. Saying so, my ex-husband fled like he was running away. That's all he amounted to, it seems. To talk big and then run away. Well, let him have his last moment. So, he won't be able to stay at the company? Ultimately, it's the president's decision, but it looks like it. Besides, I have more trust there than he does. Then, you should go all out. Of course. We decided to enjoy the family time that Paul had interrupted. My son showed his smile again. Then, my husband immediately contacted the company after we got home. Maybe it's what they say, strike while the iron is hot. Sorry, I have to go to the company. It's okay, take care. I saw him off and pondered for a moment. The fact that he called and then headed to the company meant he wanted to resolve the issue immediately. Paul had no chance now. A few hours later, my husband returned. That was quick.
Yeah.
The decision was made quickly. So, he's been fired. It seems the president has made up his mind. Hearing that, I mentally cheered. It was the most refreshing feeling I've ever had. I wonder what kind of face he'll make tomorrow. It's a shame we can't see that. The next day came, and as usual, my husband went to work. Around noon, I received a call from an unknown number. Hello? You really did it. You again. Realizing it was Paul, I couldn't help but sigh. Because of you, I've been fired. And my marriage has been called off. That's your own fault. Don't blame me for your mistakes. Don't mess with me. Say whatever you want. It just sounds like the howling of a defeated dog to me. Someday, you'll be thrown away too. Unlike someone, that won't happen. Is that all? I'm not free to chat, so
Bye.
with that, I hung up. I laughed freely in my home, feeling utterly liberated. I thought, this truly feels like freedom. I heard that Paul, having lost everything, left this place and moved to a distant town. Given what he did to me, it's only fitting. Since then, our family of 3 has been living peacefully. There's no greater happiness than this. My son is also making a diligent effort to walk every day. We continue to hope for our family's happiness and to live our lives to the fullest. Dad, who is that? As I tentatively confirmed, my father, wrapping his hand around Sarah's shoulder, and happily said, This person is my new wife, and Kristen's new mom. Nice to meet you. So, that was his intention. I only have one mom. I won't accept her. Then you will have to leave. The father continued with a grin. Live with the new mom. If you hate it, leave. Okay. My straightforward response surprised both Dad and Sarah. They probably never expected such an answer. Then, I'll prepare to leave. The rest is up to you two. Saying this to my stunned father and Sarah, I returned to my room to pack. Well then, thank you for everything. Oh, from now on, we are strangers. I won't know anything that happens to you. A month later, I received a call from my father. Kristen, help me. I don't have a father, remember? My name is Kristen. A 15-year-old junior high school senior year student. Born as the only daughter to my parents, I have always been cherished and loved. I thought there couldn't be a happier child than me. However, it seems that was not the case. I came to realize this clearly in my 6th year of elementary school. Are you Kristen? One day, as I was leaving school, a flashy woman was waiting at the gate and called out to me. I couldn't respond right away. There are 5 words I learned from my teacher right after entering elementary school. Don't go, don't ride, shout, run away immediately, inform. These words were taught as the first thing to remember in order to protect oneself. I memorized them right after learning them. Oh, did I scare you? It's okay, I'm a friend of Kristen's dad. The woman, with her flashy blonde hair styled in a voluminous way, wearing large sunglasses and flashy clothes, said this with a smirk. But by that time, I already knew. Adults who say they are okay, are often not okay. I've seen it in dramas, where kidnappers say that to kidnap children. I know you are Kristen. Look. The woman rummaged through her flamboyantly decorated bag, pulling out an equally decorated smartphone. Her nails, holding the smartphone, were so long I wondered how she could live with them, and they were heavily decorated. Look. She showed me a photo of myself on her smartphone. It was a picture taken with my parents at a church during my first communion. The same photo as my kid's mobile phone wallpaper. Why does this woman have it? Surprised, I became even more unable to respond. Wondering why I have this? It's not strange at all. Your dad gave it to me. Sarah, with a delighted laugh, tucked her smartphone back into her bag. My name is Sarah. Sorry to bother you, but could you tell your mom to hurry up and give me your dad? After saying just that, the woman who introduced herself as Sarah quickly disappeared. I was already in 6th grade, vaguely understanding what she meant. However, I didn't know what to do in such a situation. Returning home dumbfounded, I decided to say nothing upon seeing my mother's face greeting me with a welcome back. Probably, I couldn't say anything, to be honest. Since then, I continued living as usual, at least on the surface. Because my father seemed as usual. Kind and family-oriented. Handsome with a tall and slender figure, as one would expect from a former actor hopeful. I've always been proud of my dad. Yet, there remained a lump in my heart. Small, hard, cold, and heavy. No matter what I did, I was always conscious of that lump. Without saying anything, I graduated from elementary school and became a middle school student. My parents, acting as if nothing had happened, attended the entrance ceremony as normal parents, and took photos in front of the middle school's main gate, as if promised. Me, wearing a school uniform with a white flower corsage on my chest. My parents, in suits, stood on both sides. To anyone looking, we were nothing but a normal, happy family. But maybe that wasn't the truth. Thank you. While I was lost in thought, my father's voice brought me back to reality. He thanked the person who took our photo, then came back and showed us the screen. Would he give this photo to that woman named Sarah too? What's wrong? No, nothing. My mother, seeing me looking strangely at the photo, asked with concern. I looked at her, then at my father, thinking. I absolutely couldn't let my mother know. Even if, indeed, my father had that kind of relationship with the woman named Sarah. It would be okay, as long as my mother didn't know. I couldn't say anything for that reason. To act as if I didn't know, as if it never happened. Besides, it might have been a lie. Maybe that woman named Sarah just had a crush on my cool dad. And said something mean like that. Maybe she just happened to get that photo and showed it to me as a prank or harassment. I hadn't discarded that possibility yet. No, rather, I hoped it was the case. Thus, keeping silent as time passed, I entered middle school, and soon after, my mother fell ill. The diagnosis revealed a serious illness. One that would end her life in the near future, as they said. That's a lie, right? My mother told me the truth herself. No, it's not a lie. Mom won't be able to stay with Kristen for much longer. My mother said this with a weak smile. And so, there's something I want to tell Kristen.
Yeah.
What is it? After I'm gone, Kristen might have a hard time. To ensure you can live on your own, I will do everything possible. My mother clearly said, so you can live on your own. That implies not together with father, not just the two of us. Maybe she knew. I thought so, but somehow, I couldn't ask. My mother, too, probably thinking I knew, chose not to mention it explicitly. That's how it seemed. When the time comes, there might be things you find unpleasant. But I want you to trust that everything Mom did was for you. Okay, I understand. I responded with just that. I love you, honey, remember that. My mother said this happily and hugged me tightly. After that, neither of us said anything more. And we lived as if nothing had happened, just the three of us, as before. The only difference was that, over time, my mother gradually grew weaker. She went in and out of the hospital until she couldn't return anymore. That was all. When my mother weakened, my father devoted himself to her. When she was hospitalized, he would visit right after work. When at home, he would come back early to cook and take care of the house. Dad will take care of the house, so Kristen, please stay by Mom's side. To anyone looking, a perfect husband and father. Yet, in his words and expressions, I felt something artificial. I made soup, how's the taste? Yes, it's very delicious. You're always a great cook, honey. I can't beat Mom's cooking. Get well soon and cook us some delicious meals again. Playing the roles of husband and wife as if reading from a script. I, too, beside them, pretended to be a daughter, directing a fake smile at them. I wonder why. Why could I tell it was an act? Probably, my mother could too. As my father continued the charade, my mother and I played along. It felt like that. Just spending the last days left to my mother peacefully, as if nothing was wrong. That's all we were doing, just passing the time in a family play. About 2 years later, when I was in the 3rd year of middle school, my mother passed away. The pain and sorrow of losing a parent are something only those who have experienced it can understand. At the funeral, my father perfectly played the role of a bereaved husband. He cried just like me, but those tears felt hollow. The attendees were crying too, but I was just watching my father's performance, thinking how impressive it was. After the wake and the funeral, I was left alone. The people who attended told me to hang in there with my father. But I had a promise with my mother. From now on, I had to strive on my own. As expected, my father hardly came home anymore. You are big enough to be okay, on your own. Sorry, I'm so busy with work. Saying that, my father left the house, and I spent most of my time alone. I was prepared for it, but honestly, it was tough. I had thought that maybe, just maybe, after losing my mother, he would think a bit more about his daughter. I really wanted someone to be there for me. But there's no use thinking that way. At 15, you're both an adult and a child. And so, I got used to the lonely days. And the day after the month since my mother's passing, an incident happened. It was a Saturday. I was alone at home since it was a school holiday, but it started getting noisy outside the house. First, take out all the unnecessary stuff. After cleaning up, bring in the stuff from over here. My father was loudly directing many people. What's going on? What about Mom's things? To my surprise, people entering our house started to take my mother's belongings. No. Don't take those away. I stood at the entrance, blocking the people trying to take the stuff away. They were probably movers. They all looked troubled at me. The movers were just doing the job they were asked to do. I knew that, but who asked them to do this job? Dad. Why are you taking Mom's things? Mom's gone, and we need to move on. So, no one will use those tools anymore. That's why they are being taken away. I blocked the entrance again, ensuring nothing could be taken out. No. What are you planning to do with them? Things that can be sold will be sold, and the rest will be disposed of. My father said this almost happily. Don't take them away. Those are Mom's dowry. My mother's parents, my grandparents, were wealthy. And the dowry they provided was of very good quality. What the movers were trying to take away now was my mother's dowry. The movers, hearing my words, looked at each other, troubled. This dowry was made by a craftsman for Mom when she was a child. For when she would get married. It's very important. Wow, that sounds precious. As I was desperately arguing, such a voice came from behind me. Fine, then I'll use it. It was Sarah. She pushed past me into the entrance, looking over my mother's dowry. Don't know what this is about, but it's an antique, right? I'll use it, so put it back. Hey, put it back. Despite my pleading, they didn't stop, but when Sarah said so, my father had the movers return my mother's belongings. Dad, who is that? As I reluctantly confirmed, my father, wrapping his arm around Sarah's shoulder, happily said, This person is my new wife, meaning your new mom, Kristen. Nice to meet you. So that was his intention. I only have one mom. I won't accept such a person. Then you will have to leave. The father continued with a smirk. You are still a child. If you don't listen to Dad, how can you live on your own? This is mine and Mom's house. Kick that woman out. So mean, telling me to leave. Sarah pretended to cry as if she was deeply hurt. Apologize to Mom. Then we can live here together. Don't let that woman into our house. I absolutely refuse to live with her. Look what she's saying. What are we going to do, darling? Sarah leaned on my father, who looked all too pleased. Well, if you really hate it that much, you have to leave. Dad. My father said something unbelievable. Live with the new mom. If you hate it, leave. Okay. My straightforward response surprised both my father and Sarah. They probably never expected such an answer. Then, I'll prepare to leave. The rest is up to you two. Saying this to my stunned father and Sarah, I went back to my room to pack. Not much was left in my room that was important. I had moved most of my belongings to a certain place beforehand. My father never entered my room, so he seemed completely unaware. I quickly packed my school stuff and daily necessities. Well then, thank you for everything. Oh, from now on, we are strangers. I won't know anything that happens to you. Ignoring my father and Sarah, I stepped outside the house. The taxi I had called arrived promptly, so I got in and told the driver where to go.
Goodbye,
Dad. It turned out just like Mom said it would. I murmured softly from the back seat of the taxi. I arrived at a large house in the suburbs, my grandparents' home. Kristen, you did well. My grandparents greeted me with tears in their eyes. Finally feeling relieved, I clung to my grandmother and cried. To think that it really came to this. We were completely deceived. He always played the role of a good husband and father. My grandparents said this with regret, but I was fine because I already knew. Mom knew. That's why she did everything she could for me. My mother knew about my father's affair. Maybe she even knew that Sarah had approached me. My mother never mentioned such a thing to me. I wonder if she would have continued to play the role of a happy wife on the surface if she hadn't gotten sick. But when she learned about her illness, she must have made a decision. Thinking about what would happen to me after she was gone. She said she would do everything possible. One of those things was taking care of household chores. I had been helping my mother from a young age. And we started cooking together when I was in elementary school. She taught me her recipes, and I could make most of my mother's dishes. In the last year before she passed away, she taught me as much as she could. So even though my father wasn't coming home and I was living alone, I didn't struggle in that aspect. I could do laundry and cleaning. After my mother passed away and my father didn't return home, I took care of myself. It was all thanks to what my mother had taught me. Another thing my mother did started to show its effects after a while. A month after I left the home I was raised in, my father bombarded me with calls. I thought it would come to this, but ignored them. It wouldn't be fun if I answered right away. I turned off the volume of my smartphone, left it in my room when I went to school, and didn't touch it immediately when I got back. At night, after taking a bath and when it was almost time to sleep, I finally picked it up. There were 300 missed calls. My phone rang right in front of me. Even though the sound was off, the screen lit up to notify me. Maybe it's time. I silently answered the phone. Hello, Kristen? Why didn't you answer right away? Do you know how many times I called? I was immediately yelled at. How rude. I didn't respond. Hello, Kristen? Why aren't you answering? I remained silent. Kristen, it's Dad. You haven't forgotten my voice, have you? I wish I could forget, but unfortunately, I remember. Kristen, help me. I don't have a father, remember? After I said just that, my father was silent for a moment before continuing. It's Dad. I'm in real trouble, can you help me? You're not the kind of daughter to abandon your parents, are you? His coaxing voice was disgusting. As I said earlier, I don't have a father. Kristen. You must have the wrong number, please check again. I hung up and turned off my smartphone. That would likely be the last time I would hear the voice of the man who used to be my father. I plan to cancel this phone soon. Perhaps because I didn't answer his calls. The next day, my father and Sarah came to my grandparents' house. Let me see Kristen. You must have influenced her. Send her back right now. That's right. A young and beautiful mom came to pick you up. So come back and live with us. Kristen, I'll forgive you now. Hand over the house. Then you can come back. Father and Sarah were kicked out of the house. Because I was the owner of the house. Before passing away, my mother transferred the deed and various other assets to my name. The house was a gift from my grandparents when my mother got married. As soon as she learned about her illness, she took action. She transferred the deed of the house to me. Of course, she paid the inheritance tax. But she didn't tell my father. So, my father thought he had rights to the house as the husband. He believed he was entitled to my mother's estate and panicked when he realized otherwise. I asked a lawyer, who was acting as my guardian, to send a certified letter to my father demanding he vacate the property. That's when he learned the truth and desperately contacted me. The letter stated he had to leave within a month or face a lawsuit. It also mentioned that all the furniture inside the house belonged to me, and that I would claim damages for any damages. Before leaving the house, I had taken photos of all the household items. I remembered the movers handling things quite roughly. Maybe Sarah also damaged something. Those high-quality, one-of-a-kind pieces made by craftsmen would cost quite a bit to repair. Hopefully, they weren't damaged. About 10 days after my certified letter arrived, I received a certified mail from my father. It contained a will, supposedly written by my mother, stating all her assets were to be left to my father. The letter demanded that my grandparents immediately hand over all of my mother's estate according to the will. It accused my grandparents of deceiving their precious granddaughter and destroying the father-daughter relationship. It demanded I be returned immediately. In response, we sent a counter-certified mail. Unfortunately, that will is invalid because there is a more recent will. Wills are prioritized by the date they were made. And the will my father had was dated shortly after my mother learned of her illness. In contrast, another will was made the day before my mother passed away. My mother had prepared a will in advance and, when the time came, added the date and handed it to the lawyer. There couldn't be a newer will than that. In my mother's shaky handwriting, I could feel her determination not to leave anything to my father. Her will stated, all of her estate would be left to Kristen. Kristen would be adopted by her grandfather, and her father would not be given custody. The arrangements for this were entrusted to the lawyer acting as Kristen's guardian. Most of my mother's estate was already in my name. But this was her way of stating that not even the last penny should go to my father. A few days after sending the second certified mail, a lawyer hired by my father contacted us. He said my father wanted to meet with me. Your father thinks there has been some misunderstanding. He can't understand why you suddenly left home and treated him this way. What happened? My father had told the lawyer that I had silently gone to my grandparents' house, making it impossible to contact me. He said he had visited my grandparents' house, but was threatened with police involvement and was refused a meeting. He suggested that maybe I was being held against my will by my grandparents. He was terribly worried. His daughter, me, is still a minor. As her biological parent, he couldn't accept that I would agree to being adopted by my grandfather without his permission. Maybe my grandparents had misled me, and I believed them. She's my precious only daughter left by my wife. Please, I beg you, help me get my daughter back. The lawyer said it was hard to watch my father speak so tearfully. He looked genuinely distressed. Your father said that since losing your mother, you might be a bit confused. He too lost the love of his life and couldn't provide the support you needed. He thinks that might be the reason. Even when my mother was alive, I wondered why he always seemed so theatrical. Maybe because he once aspired to be an actor. I remembered something. On her deathbed, my mother asked my father to take care of me. And he agreed, holding her hand. Even my grandparents, who were suspicious of my father, were moved to tears by that scene, which looked like something out of a drama. I watched coldly as my father held my mother's hand. I couldn't feel any warmth of love in that gesture. He's going to keep up the act till the end, isn't he? I said this and played a recording for the lawyer. It included everything from when the movers came to our house to when my grandparents visited. It revealed my father's true nature. The lawyer's expression changed upon hearing it. My father had always pretended to care deeply for me and my mother. But once my mother passed away and he brought Sarah into our home, his true colors were finally revealed. I had finally obtained evidence. This changes things. I'm sorry. The lawyer apologized and left. He later informed us that he had terminated his representation of my father due to the false pretenses under which he was hired and had charged him a penalty. After this, it's unlikely anyone will take your father's case. Exactly. No one would take his side if they knew the truth. Why did my father keep up this act, and why did my mother accept it? There was a reason. My father was my mother's first love. When she was in middle school, the same age I am now, she saw a play and became a fan of my father. At that time, my father was a member of a small theater group, aspiring to be an actor. My mother, engaging in what we'd now call fan activities, fell in love with him and they started dating. My grandparents, who disapproved of the relationship with my father, 8 years her senior and an unsuccessful actor, reluctantly allowed them to marry when my mother became pregnant with me right after graduating from college. One of the conditions was that they take my mother's surname. My mother was the only daughter of a company president. My father quit acting to work at a subsidiary of my grandfather's company after they married. Since then, my grandfather had always been wary of him. I never really trusted him. Yes, he always seemed a bit insincere. But seeing him at the hospital, I thought he truly loved Mama and Kristen. My father may not have succeeded as an actor, but he was very good at deceiving us. Even I would have continued to think of him as a wonderful father if I hadn't met Sarah. He's really good at acting. But then, how did Mom realize? As I wondered, my grandmother showed me a letter from my mother. It was entrusted to the lawyer to be given to my grandparents after her death. From early in their marriage, my mother began to feel distrustful of my father. Despite previously adoring him, she started to feel as if his behavior was deceitful after I was conceived. Perhaps it was maternal intuition. When she started investigating because of her suspicions, she found out my father had many other women. Given his good looks, many fans, like my mother, supported him financially. Yet, my mother tried to believe that out of all these people, he had chosen her. But she learned of him bragging to others. I snagged the president's only daughter. I'm set for life now. I don't really love her, but she's wealthy, so I'll take good care of her. My father had always seen my mother as nothing more than a source of money, even when she was just a fan. Learning this shocked her, but she hoped that having a child would bring happiness to their family. As she wrote in the letter, after my birth, my father appeared to be a very good father on the surface. Everyone was deceived, but my mother carried both the desire to believe and the inability to trust him, regularly investigating his surroundings. Then came Sarah's entrance. Sarah was a worker at a nightclub my father frequented. She became my father's mistress, believing he was the son and heir to a major company president. However, the truth was that my father was not the son of my grandfather, but his son-in-law. She came to me without knowing this, thinking if she could just get my mother out of the way, she could take her place. My father and Sarah eventually gave up and left that house. Even with the affair brought to light, my mother, who could have sued, was no longer there. They had nothing more to lose or pay. They seemed to be brazening it out, thinking that way. But I could sue them. I made sure they knew that. That day, Sarah came to see me at school. The act of a mistress maliciously interfering with custody. In simple terms, it means a mistress attempting to separate a child from their parent can be sued for damages. That day, Sarah threatened me to make my mother aware of her existence and pressured her to leave. I informed her that I would sue her for that action. Sarah denied doing such a thing, but a private investigator who had been looking into Sarah happened to catch that moment and recorded it as evidence. Sarah begged me not to sue, apologizing, but I showed no mercy. As a result of the lawsuit, Sarah's actions became widely known, and she was no longer able to work at the bar. Some people caused trouble, but apparently, the clientele dwindled significantly once they learned she had done such a thing to a child. The bar where my father met her was quite upscale. Such establishments value their reputation above all else, and can't afford to employ someone like Sarah. The bar fired Sarah. She threatened to sue me for defamation, but I told her to go ahead. Being sued by her would not trouble me at all. Instead, Sarah would likely face more difficulties. In the end, she did not sue and left the club. She probably won't be able to work in such a high-end place again. My lawsuit is still ongoing. Even if I win, I won't get much money, but that's not the point. I'm determined to see this through to the end and not let them escape justice. My father also became unable to stay at his company. He had gotten the job through my grandfather's connections, and had been posing as a potential successor because he was the son-in-law. But this incident revealed that I, his daughter, had kicked him out of the house and that he had had a mistress for years. It turns out he wasn't very competent at his job. Well, he could always make himself look capable, thanks to his acting skills, making him appear shrewd, but in reality, he was pretty much incompetent. Everyone came to realize this anew. With such acting skills, it's a wonder he didn't succeed as an actor. Perhaps the entertainment industry requires more than just talent. Maybe the stars have something my father lacked, an aura or presence. Anyway, his true nature being revealed led to a flood of pent-up frustrations from those around him. He became persona non grata everywhere, looked down upon not just by colleagues but also by business partners. His good looks, which had previously garnered him favorable attention from female employees, now earned him their scorn. He lingered at the company for a while but eventually left due to the unbearable atmosphere. He's now living in a small apartment with Sarah. He's reached out a few times asking for help, but we are strangers now. Moreover, strangers I detest. I have no obligation to help him. By the way, Sarah did damage my mother's dowry when I claimed compensation for it. She must have realized further lawsuits would be troublesome and paid up fully. Maybe she used my father's severance pay or savings, or perhaps even took on debt. But that's none of my concern. I told them before, you're on your own. I've officially become my grandfather's adopted child. It's just a change in legal status without a change in name or anything else. However, I'll be going to school abroad from high school to prepare to take over my grandfather's role. Losing my mother was incredibly sad and lonely. I still cry when I remember her. But I can't cry forever. My mother must have known such a day would come. So she made sure I wouldn't struggle with language abroad by teaching me several languages. She really raised me to survive anywhere. I'm just starting to walk towards a bright future for myself. I want to absorb everything I can abroad, living up to my mother's expectations. And I'm determined to meet someone who truly loves me for who I am. In this regard, Mom was a negative example, wasn't she? As I said this, I felt as if the photo of my mother smiled back at me a bit sheepishly.